And I said, if you're not keeping a daily journal of disappointments, of frustration, of vision, you're going to look back and wonder how you got over.
Busy as a bee, busy, just busy. And he started working in a grocery store. I think he was about 7 or 8, sweeping the floor, taking out the garbage for that man. So he always wanted to work. And before then, when he was like 2, he just talked. But we said Spanish, but I'm thinking he was speaking in tongue. I didn't understand that. And everybody was saying, he gonna be a pastor. He gonna be a preacher. That's what everybody was saying. Because he would have a whole group of kids around him. Because my nieces and nephew and all of them, they'd be sitting and listening. They didn't know what he was saying. He didn't know what he was saying, I could imagine. He always been a great talker, just talk, and real busy, active. And it seemed like, to me, he had always had a group of people, friends, in and out the house, at the church. He was a junior deacon. He was an usher. So he been busy all his life.
Chicago is such a cultured city. With all of its problems that you hear now, you would think it was the most horrific place in the country. Well, our president comes from there, President Barack Obama. And so many great people have come out of that great city. Lou Rawls graduated from the same city, same high school I graduated from. Jennifer Hudson graduated from the same high school, Dunbar Vocational High School. And so when you think in terms of Chicago, it really shaped my spiritual foundation. It shaped my family dynamics because I came from a strong family unit. My dad was my hero. My mom is a symbol of great strength, and I watched them struggle to raise 5 children. So it gave me a deep sense of family. Chicago gave me a deep sense of culture because I remember the night that Dr. King was assassinated. And the cleaners, my mom and dad, this kind of was a conversation because my mom and dad had clothes in the cleaners that was torn and broken into, and the windows broken into, and clothes were taken. And that was how, in the African American community, on that night, we expressed our anger. Though I was not involved, I was a kid. I was a child of 7, 8 years old. And my mom and dad, I come from a very structured home. So my dad and mom talked a lot about the movement, but I was too young to be involved in the movement. But I watched how it shaped how my mom and dad trained me. You're going to go to school. You're going to either get out of here and go to college, or you're going to get out of here and go to the military. You're going to do something. I had this great aspiration to be an actor. So I wanted to go to college, to go to acting, theater, but a couple things started happening in my life at the age of 18 that forced me to say, let me get out of here, go into the military. But they shaped. My dad was not involved in the movement. My mom was not involved in the movement, but they were affected by the movement. It affected how they pushed us to become something. I never forget some of the sayings of my dad, the great late Ned Odom. He would say to us, no one's better than you. And if you're going to do something, be the best at being that.
And to be the best. And he didn't like for him to say, can't, you can do anything. He had so much love for him. And one time he told me, he said, I thank God for giving me Bishop, because if I wouldn't have treated him nice, I wouldn't have no son. He was a proud man to have him as a son. And he would be rejoicing. But the only thing, he didn't want him to get hurt. Many times he said he wanted the best for him. But he would be sitting back proud.
I see my father, Ned Odom, as my first father, mentor, friend. I'll say this from the beginning. All of my mentors are deceased now other than Bishop Kirby. And that's sobering. It's sobering because every one of them played strategic roles in my life. My dad was definitely a mentor, but he was a father. He gave me foundation, taught me how to be a father. It's funny, he taught me how to be a father. By watching him, he taught me how to be a father, how to be a man, a provider, you know. He was the kind of guy that if the family was in trouble, he knew what to do to go get the family out of trouble. He was the kind, as an example, you couldn't come home with excuses. My dad didn't accept excuses. He wouldn't let you come home and talk about a teacher. He wouldn't let you come home and say, someone made me do it. He always felt like you self-lead first. You independently think first. You don't follow negativity. So he shaped our minds, shaped us to dream. He wanted me to leave Chicago to make something of myself and then perhaps come back and give. One of the things that stick out to me as I look back in retrospect is that I had this traumatic experience when I was 16, a little Pee Wee gang thing in Chicago. And I thought that maybe my life was going to spin off into that life of crime and gangster and this kind of thing. And so at 16, I got stabbed by an opposing gang in our community. That propelled me into church. I never wanted to experience that again. So I started at that point knowing that God's hand was on my life. I'll never forget the emergency agent doctor said to me, a half an inch away from your spinal cord, you either be dead or paralyzed for the rest of your life. That traumatized me in a good way. And then I went to church, never left church. I've always been in church, but then that propelled me to be glued to the spiritual community. And then I ended up in the Marine Corps, running from a situation in Chicago. Didn't know that I was gonna, like Moses, gonna run right into God. And one night in my barracks room, I had this encounter with the Holy Spirit and heard the Lord call me into ministry. I was 18, 19 years old at the time. And so all of my military career, the 7 years I was on active duty, several years in the reserve, I was saved, loved God, or had this limited encounter with the Lord, but it shaped my foundation as a Marine. I became the guy that young troops would call me, hey, Sergeant Powell, I need to get out of trouble. I'm in some trouble, boom, boom, boom. Because they knew I was a church-going guy, that kind of thing. But because of that street experience, I spent 10 years almost as an evangelist. But because of that street experience, I felt this passion toward street people, the drug addicts, the hurting, the prostitutes. And so that's where my ministry started. I always say to the young preacher that the world is full of pulpits without walls. You know, there's places, if you really called to preach, if you really feel a need to talk to people, go to the streets to express his love, to express his forgiveness, and that there is another life. I can't even begin to say how many young prostitutes gave their lives to Jesus. From time to time, we're talking about 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, I run into some of these people and they'll say, you know, their lives were impacted by my street ministry. That's why I had such a passion to go to the prisons, to go to the streets, to go to hurting people, because I believe that I was somehow connected in that way when I had that stabbing experience on the streets, that this is how God formulated my ministry, my calling, and that kind of thing. So then, as I migrated through the Marine Corps, Nathaniel Love, Timothy Moore, these two men kind of helped shape my Marine Corps career, but those early years of manhood in the Marine Corps. And Nathaniel Love particularly was the pastor of the church that I acknowledged my call to ministry. Oh my God, he's the one who told me there were several things I was vacillating with going back to doing. He said, don't you go back. If you go back, your life will be ruined for the rest of your life. He would get in your face. He was a E8 in the Marine Corps, and he would get in your face and just, then as I left the Corps, came to Albany and all those things, I met the late, great Reverend Milton Merritt.
I introduced Pastor Powell to my husband. We were working together and we would talk, and I had seen him before, but I introduced him. I asked him to come by the house because they were not living very far from us, and I introduced him to my husband, and it was like love at first sight. They made it right off the bat. They clicked. And he looked on Bishop as a son. He disciplined him as a son, and he loved him as a son. And when I say loved him as a son, I mean exactly that. And love is not always mushy love. When it was time to call him intact, he called him intact. So he loved him, he respected him, and he treated him just like the other boys.
I thought about this the other day, and I forgot these moments. But I would go to his house on a Friday night and play pool with him for many years. And that's what we did, our talks and our chats. He had a pool table on the second floor of his home, and we would go up there and play pool, and every now and then drink a glass of red wine and chat about people, things, places, experiences. He would go to Dothan. He was a vet also. He would go to Dothan, and I'd take him to Dothan, take him to Savannah to visit his mom and his brothers. And
if he needed to go to the doctor, I had no reservations if everybody else was trying to straighten their schedule out to say, can you take him to the doctor? Yes, can you drive him to Dublin? And he never told me no. And I knew he was always my last resort when something like that comes up, because I know how busy pastors are. But he never told me no. They would take trips to Savannah to see his mother, his brother, and he was just one of the boys. He has been just one of the boys. And come hell or high water, I will always be grateful for that. I will always love him for that. And he will always be my child. We always include him in functions.
I'll never forget when one Thanksgiving holiday, I was supposed to eat at his house, and he gave me a time to get there. And I got there a couple hours late, you know, and I married, I got there, they fed me. Then he said, I'll see you in my office. And we spent a lot of time in his office. He would give me books to read. He'd give me tapes to listen to, different theologians. He would expose me to them. And so I want you to go read this and tell me what you think. He was very hands-on, but he was life-on too. And he looked at me and said, don't you ever show up at my house 2 hours late. I'm trying to train you. He didn't say those words, but this is what he meant. I can't tell you what he said, but I'm trying to train you. I'm trying to get some things out of you. I'm trying to prepare you for leadership. I'm trying to prepare you to lead other people and to mature and empower other people. But I first got to get that out of you.
He was so hard on him sometimes. I said to him one day, I said, why are you so hard on this boy? He said, I've got to get him ready for the church as it changes. And see, my mind wouldn't have gone there. And he said, because the church is going through a transformation. The church as you know it, and he told me this years before he passed, he said, the church as you know it is changing before your lifetime is over. You won't know the church as you know it. And I've got to be hard on him and get him ready for those changes. I've got to plant seeds in him, in his subconscious, that will come out when I'm no longer here. And he said, one thing I'm working hard on him with is timeliness. He was very hard on him about time. And I think he got it. I really think he got it.
That's the kind of preparation I had. And he was very candid. Though he was a loving, caring, when I tell you Reverend Mary was a gentleman, he was a gentleman of all men. I mean, I run into people now and that's what's going to come up. He was such a gentleman. Yet he was so very candid when he needed to be, particularly when he knew he had to get at something inside of you. I get a little emotional when I think about Reverend Merritt because I've never met anybody like him. I miss him, you know. And then as my life matriculated and Reverend Merritt shifted in the seasons of his life, he started aging and stopped pastoring and retiring. God allowed one of my covenant members to introduce me to Bishop Powell and Bishop Kirby Clemens. And they introduced me to a more extensive message, the kingdom message. Bishop Powell was such a pioneer and a trailblazer of that message. He brought the Bible to life from a relevant perspective. And how do we look at the Bible from a perspective of making a difference in your present world with principles that come out of the Word, not just simply living it out yourself, but changing your generation, changing your world with kingdom principles. And Bishop Powell made that impact. It was a message I had never heard before, and it was a message that I'd read some of the things he preached about and talked about, but it didn't have the depth and the meaning until I met Bishop Powell and Bishop Kirby Clemens. Now, Bishop Kirby Clemens is in a category all by himself. He is one of my mentors that's still alive. We meet probably once a month, and oh my God, he and Reverend Merritt are very similar. They're bigger than life, you know. When they open their mouth, it's like God's talking, you know. And he not only our relationship has shifted. He's definitely a mentor, but he's a mentor friend.
I characterize him as a man that's sensitive to the Spirit. And if you're sensitive to the Spirit, you're sensitive to people. He's a very charismatic leader. He's an outstanding preacher. He understands people. He knows how to influence people, to affect them. So I would characterize him as a man that loves God, that loves people, and wants to see the best in people. He has integrity, and that's something that as an archbishop, I've traveled around the world, and I've seen I often say to people that gifts and callings may open the door, but only integrity will keep it open. And he's demonstrated integrity over this many years, and that was very impressive to me. He's concerned about his people. He's concerned about what his people thinks. Decisions he makes. Not many pastors have that kind of sensitivity. They're more independent, but he's more, he's congregational sensitive. That's what I would say.
I see now the criticalness of mentoring the next generation. There is no leading the next generation without mentorship, without intimacy, without companionship, without getting to know. And I love the movements in which I've been a part of, but what has made the greatest impact on my life is the mentorship and God's love for me to give me the extensiveness of these leaders and their depth and their substance and their wisdom and their experience, to give that to me. The previous generation of mentors in my life were definitely father figures, but people like Nathan Bird, Jimmy Sneed, Lorenzo Hurd, they are mentors, but from a relational perspective. It's now we relate to one another, but each man brings a different sphere of influence and different sphere of experiences into your life as a friend and as a brother, and what I've gleaned from them.
I think that Bishop and I are brothers from another mother. We both had a spiritual father mentor in the late great M.W. Merritt, who invested in both of us, who took time. He was in Bishop's life much longer than mine, but in the time he poured so much, and that's the beauty of mentors. Sometimes they're pouring and they don't even know they're pouring, and you don't always know they're pouring. You just know ultimately that they filled a space in your life. And so as a brother, there is at a certain age you get to a place where you can't trust as many people, because there are people who want to be where you are without having paid the price. And to have someone who is where you are, or at some levels where you would love to be, and they enjoy your presence as you enjoy theirs, that you're able to be honest. In our profession, you want to be able every now and then to laugh, that we love God and we love church and we love the Word of God, but we also love to laugh, and that's what our relationship as brothers are able to do. That there are times that we can just get together, laugh about things, laugh about even when we were young preachers, and now we're growing a little in grace, growing a little older, and sometimes laugh about some of the things that we tried to do as pastors too soon, and sometimes old deacons, old church folks sort of, you end up trying to wrestle with the church, and you find out later on it wasn't even worth wrestling about. So we have those kind of conversations, those kinds of things that we're able to laugh about, and that we're able to trust each other when we're vulnerable. I don't know anyone in any profession that didn't get to a place where he or she at a moment is vulnerable. And brothers can be vulnerable among each other, and that's, I think, what we bring to our relationship, that we can even talk about when we're disappointed. Because everybody thinks, because pastors and bishops and apostles and evangelists and teachers, because we're smiling, they think we're always happy. And sometimes we really actually feel like we didn't get the return, the rate of return in our investment. And sometimes we seemingly feel like we've poured all we have into a person. And sometimes they walk away without talking to us. They leave without waving. And you wonder, what happened. And all of us have it. And so sometimes it's not even about laughing. Sometimes we, as brothers, we're able to cry on each other's, not literally on each other's show. I don't want you to think we're crying on each other, but we're able to shed a tear and the other understand. Yes.
Well, I was thinking about how to characterize the brother relationship that I have with him. I want to make a statement, and I'm not trying to be deep. I thought about this, and I think, that I heard, Pastor Heard talk about that so eloquently. And I said that I don't think we're going to really get to know Bishop Powell in the earth. I don't think we have enough time. The unfolding and manifestation. I think when he crossed the finish line, he's gonna just, release it all to God and go and sit down with the right hand of the Father, him and God the Father and Jesus, and they can all talk about it. As a brother, man, he, as a brother, I don't know, brother, our relationship developed. I too known him a long time, but here's Jimmy, you don't need to do that. Jimmy, you need to think about that. Jimmy, you don't need to, do that. And I tell this story where I go. He has been a great friend, and he used to do some great correction of me, and he was real, whatever. He don't do it no more. And I remember once there was a situation, and he will know exactly what I'm talking about. And he didn't even know me well. He just said, well, I don't think you need to do that. I think you need to whatever. And he went on. And I said, Jesus, this man don't know me. What? But I heard what he said, and he was walking with that kind of authority. And I think our relationship starts to develop. Who can you be transparent with? Who can you not have fear of being yourself? Who can you be vulnerable with, your strength and your weakness, and not have them to change on you? And Bishop is one of the few people I tease, but it's a real truth. I ain't got to promise I'm gonna always tell everybody the truth. But there's a few people that invest in me in relationship that I'm going to tell them the absolute truth. I don't mean they're going to get to the White House or get somewhere else and hear some more of it that I forgot to leave out. As best as I can, I'm going to be as honest as I can and as vulnerable, as I can, because, he's in covenant with me and he's stuck with me through some thick and thins. I can trust that he's going to be there. He's a dependable brother.
And so I watch how God will, as you grow and as you mature, give you brothers to help keep you focused and centered, keep you out of trouble. If a man's in trouble, if a person is in trouble, it comes from one or two things. Either you have mentors and you didn't listen, or you don't have a mentor at all. Mentors are in your life to save you some time. Someone else, another colleague, told me about William Spring and said that they were empty and they needed a pastor. I didn't know at the time that, because it was a rural church in a rural area, I just sent my resume in as let me just do it. Didn't think that I would even remotely be looked at. Well, they did look at me, because one of the things, what was happening, William Spring was looking for someone, because there was a group of people inside that church who really was catching the wave of the Paul Morton movement, the full gospel movement. They were searching for just a little bit more. That's in 1990, 80s and the early 90s is when the transition from hoopology to teaching was becoming a hunger inside of the African American community. Nothing wrong with the hoop, but there were people who were saying, we want a little bit more. We want you to go a little bit deeper. We want you to teach before you hoop. We want you to teach us something before you hoop, etc. Never forget Joseph Howard. I was a part of one of his dissertations in college at Morehouse, because I came with a preach-teach ministry. I didn't look like the old hooper, but I also looked a little different inside of that space, because I mixed it up a little bit. And Joseph said that I represented a new style of preaching. I didn't see that it was prophetic at the time, but now I look back, it was a prophetic moment. So there was a group inside of William Spring that was looking for this transition. And so when the gentleman told them about me, they said, "We want to hear you."
The first Sunday that Bishop Powell came to the church to preach, he was not even scheduled to preach that Sunday, but because there was a mix-up with the schedule and the minister that was supposed to preach that morning couldn't come, we invited him to come. He accepted. After hearing him minister and the word that came forth, and with such clarity, it was touching, it was like a teaching method. It was what we had been hungry for, the young folks, I should say, in the church, because we did have like two groups at the church. We had the older members and we had the younger members, even though we weren't just divided along that line. And they were kind of steeped in tradition, and you know what the traditional minister sound like, and you know his message and his delivery. And so all of that was so different, and the message was so clear, and like I said, it was touching. So after that initial sermon, we kind of knew that this was what we had been hungry for, that we wanted a change.
And before you know it, I went again. Reverend Merritt was my pastor, and so he pushed me, keep preaching, because Reverend Merritt was not a hooping preacher. But before I ever met Reverend Merritt, I never really prescribed to that style. I always enjoyed great hooping preachers, but that wasn't my style. Never forget, my licensing preacher said to me, "Your ministry will be different. You represent something different." Wow. I didn't realize that even when he spoke, it was prophetic.
That I think, I believe that God orchestrated the whole thing, because we were in a meeting with the pastor at that time, and he told us that he was leaving, going to another church full time. And it wasn't like it was any argument or anything. We just accepted what he said, wished him well, and we immediately started looking for someone. Well, somebody was recommended to us. Matter of fact, it was Bishop Powell that was recommended to us by another minister. And so God ordained it from the beginning. It was time, and so the move was made.
The gentleman hooked me up with William Spring. I preached a couple times, and before you know it, they were having a vote.
Well, you know, in a traditional church, the membership comes together and they vote for the person that they want. So that's what we did. That was the method that we used to select the pastor. We had a meeting, we got together, and his name was not the only name that was submitted. And so we voted. And of course, he won the vote. There was a faction in the church at the time who wanted someone more traditional, someone that followed a line with what we already had before. And so that's what they were pushing for, even after the vote. You know, after the vote, there were a few who just didn't want to accept the vote.
Well, what's so profound about that is the traditional deacons and the traditional group there who was not being exposed to Dr. Woods, who was a teacher in the community of Albany, Georgia, the Paul Morton movement. The people who were not exposed to that voted against me, did not want me. But there was that group that says, this is the one we need. who were looking for just something a little different. Don't mind the hoop, don't mind the aesthetics of Black African preaching, however, was looking for just a little bit more foundation in terms of teaching. And so they fought. It was a battle. I think the vote was 23 to 13 or something like that.
But we just stood steadfast. No, we have voted. This is who we want. And it was a little difficult because these were people that, that you didn't exactly just look up to them, but you respected their position and you respected the way they thought and you cared about that. But we knew that if we were gonna move, if we were gonna change, if we were gonna be vibrant, like Jackie said, if we were going to progress, that we couldn't stay there. We had to be, like they said, steadfast, unmovable, and that's we were.
And so they got me in. For the first 5 years, it was a battle preaching to people who didn't really want you. But it was a part of the move of the Holy Spirit. Didn't know it at the time, but when I look back, oh wow, this was the Holy Spirit orchestrating this relationship between me and that nucleus of people in William Spring who was just crying out for more.
We started out as a prayer house, and that was my grandmother and her children and some of the older ones of the community and other people. But it started out as a prayer house, and prayer was what they really leaned on. And I think doing this whole ordeal of calling Bishop Powell, which was Pastor Powell, Reverend Powell at that time, it was just divine. It was God. We were vessels and we didn't know it. We were the workers, and God orchestrated the whole thing. It was already divine. It was already set in place. We just had to do the footwork. And I think that's how it ended up being, and has transitioned to 30 years. But it just was a move of God. And like Linda said, there was no fussing, no hard feelings with our pastor that left. Everything was just in divine order.
And we became partners, we became a congregation, and we started buying property, building our Sunday school, doing so many wonderful things in the community. It became such a powerful thing. And then I looked up one day and we were no longer William Spring. We were different. We represented a different flavor, a different mark on the Albany community. And so we started making decisions to fit who we had become versus who we were. We were praying, a group of us back in those days. Angela Jones, Mike Jones, all of us, Charlene Wingfield, and people I don't remember everyone that was in the room. And I looked up in this circle, and I looked at church, I looked at congregation, I looked at worship, and we were no longer a traditional Baptist church. We were something different. And I looked throughout the congregation, and we started drawing people from all walks of life, from different faiths. So we first was going to name the church New Life Missionary Baptist Church. And so because there was a new life in the city, something similar to that, let me look up the word new life. Let me find what that word means. And so we came up on the word rhema, which means a right now word, new utterance kind of thing. And we knew that there was not a rhema in the region, that was not a, well, what is rhema? I can't tell you how many calls I got after we named the church Rhema Word Worship Center that you messed up that church. What do you call it? What does rhema mean?
I know there had to be a big fight on the name change. What? Because deacons think they own the church. If I had my druthers, I'd do away with deacons. Because, you know, they don't study, they don't read, they don't go to class to learn what their roles are. So it's by instinct and usually by natural instinct. But that's getting into the litany, but the natural person does not understand the things of God. We know that. So that's a big challenge. I'd like to know how he worked through that. How were decisions made? Because people will not have your vision. You have the vision, but you've got to be able to present that vision in an understandable way to get people to buy in and follow.
The name change came about because the name of the people had changed. The spirit of the people had changed. And it depicted part of my ministry. I didn't know that I had a prophetic flow, didn't know didn't know none of that, didn't have words to it. So the name change came because word, right now, what do you need right now, being relevant, those kinds of things. And so that's how the name change came about. And I looked up one day when I presented the name change to the people, I didn't have a whole lot of resistance because most people felt like it's time. We're not the same people we used to be.
But we were looked at as strange after he started pastoring. People even would say, what's wrong with them over there? You know, our singing was different. We had other musicians that came and brought about a difference in our music as we went out and sung on anniversaries or, you know, and even when we went to church, other church engagements. But as a whole, everything about us was new and fresh, and it was good. And when he speak, people would listen, and then they would say, where he comes from, you know. It was almost like, who is that man from Galilee, you know. But we were looked at as strange, but we walked in that strangeness, and we continued to cling to him and support him. And we were there, unmovable again, steadfast, you know. And that's what we held on to. And that's what brought us to where we are now.
What Rhema did was extended our reach of fellowship. We continue to fellowship with Baptist churches, Methodist churches, Pentecostal churches. It kind of gave us the position of relating to all people of faith and not just one group of people. But William Spring always had that special touch on it, that special flavor, that special different. They sang different, they felt different, they responded to teaching and preaching differently. So it was almost like it was destined for us to meet. I needed something new and fresh. They needed something new and fresh. And so it became a 30-year relationship.
His legacy will be phenomenal, because how did you do that in the South, above all places? A pure country church, relatively small as I recall, And really, I just thought it was going to be a training ground. I didn't think he was going to stay that long anyway when he first started. But I don't know how God gave him the vision. I'd like to know that. We didn't talk about that. Unless a person want to talk about their vision, I don't get them to talk about it, because a vision is personal. But the Bible does admonish you to write it down, and you're to review it from time to time. But we just talked in general about the vision was to move the church forward into a different direction. And I shared with him my story about trying to do the same thing, and I didn't get very far, so I quit. I saw them through the moment they asked me to see them through. I didn't just quit. But when I got to that moment, I decided, okay, I need to start the work that God has given me, because I cannot have this group turn over a new leaf. You got to just start it from the ground, build it from the ground up. So I'd be curious to know too. And I'll say to this, if Bishop see this, and he didn't keep that journal like I asked him to, we're going to have a spiritual warfare.
It was amazing how, I don't know if that many would remember this, but I was consecrated to the office of bishop by the great late Archbishop Earl Polk.
Bishop Polk and I both were impressed about him being a bishop separately and distinctly from one another. Interesting, I think he called me one Sunday morning. He said, I was thinking about Pastor Victor Powell and consecrating my bishop. I said, that's amazing. I said, I was thinking the same thing, and I was going to call you. So it was like we had this mutual impression, separate and distinct from one another. So that means that both of us knew something about his ministry. I had known him a little bit longer, and had some interactions with him, had been down to his church a number of years, and he had come up to the cathedral. So his consecration, I could say, was truly an impression of the Lord from two men who had a high regard for the office of bishop, knew a whole lot about pastors, and when we both would agree that he was a man that should be consecration bishop, I think that was something that was impressive, yeah.
He calls on a Saturday while we're out here in church having, I think, rehearsal or prayer or something, and somebody said, well, the phone is ringing, and it was his administrator. He's calling and saying, I want to come down tomorrow. And we're like, whoa, Bishop Polk wants to come to Rhema, to Albany, Georgia? He comes down and he announced that God spoke to him in the middle of the night to consecrate this man of God. And in the middle of his sermon, he pulls off his coat jacket while preaching on Elijah and Elisha. I'll never forget it as long as I live, and put his coat around me. And he said, this is what this is. So I have believed in that moment that it was a prophetic moment, because I believe that God was saying, to some degree, you're going to take up part of his mantle. You're going to, and then a few years later, Archbishop goes to be with the Lord. Many of his assistants, many of his covenant partners who had been with him many years said that he had never done that, and did not do that from that time to the time of his death to no one else, where he literally took his coat off and says, you are now being promoted to the next level.
One of the key things with Bishop Polk was the whole idea of a shepherd. As you know, even though he was consecrated an archbishop, he was known as an apostle and a bishop at times, but he would always say that he knew that he was called to be a pastor. So what impressed him about Pastor Victor Powell was him being a pastor, shepherding people, his interaction with people. When I'd go down and come back, I would talk to him about the ministry, and he related to people. So I think the thing that impressed him most was his shepherding instincts, his willingness to pastor and to help people. I think that was the most important thing.
Of course, my life has never been the same after that moment. What did it mean? I didn't know what it meant at the time. I did not come out of the spiritual rankings of my heritage spiritually, did not complement that ecclesiastical order. And so right after that, I was introduced to a whole nother level of what the bishopric meant, the connection to the Roman Catholic Church, to Bishop Powell having gone to Rome and was consecrated by the cardinals there. And then him and several other bishops, they started the ICCC, where they have a direct connection to the Catholic Church. I thought it was so powerful in terms of the bishopric, in terms of the ranking. But it meant it had deep significance to me from the perspective of that I believe that it was God saying to me that your influence has changed, your influence has broadened. It brought also something new and fresh to the region, to Albany, Georgia, because Bishop had never consecrated anyone else in this area to the office of bishop. And it brought a new understanding of how leaders are elevated and promoted. From that point on, I started going to the nations of the world. In 1990, 91, one of them, right after pastoring, Brother Lowe asked me to come go to the mission field with him and go to Mexico. And so we went to the southern part of Mexico, went from town to town preaching the gospel. And I didn't know at the moment or at the time that that was going to be the start of missions. And at the time, we called all the trips mission trips. Anytime a church went to the nations, we took food, we took money, we took assistance. Of course, we preached the gospel of the kingdom. And then it morphed into going into other nations of the world, like Africa, Asia, other countries in South America and Latin America, Haiti. It morphed into building a church, building a medical clinic, helping a pastor build himself a house so that he can meet the needs of the community he was connected to, helping to purchase a well and put a well in the village. International ministry, I can remember as a little boy that I had dreams of a little boy before God ever called me to preach. I had dreams of preaching to crowds as far as my eyes could see. It was full of people. As I look back in retrospect on those dreams, I knew it was the continent of Africa because all these people were people of color. So as a little boy, I knew that I would do something significant. I just didn't know how it would all come together. I look back at God's grace and I look back at God's hand because it wasn't something I thought I would do. I just knew that there was something unique and different about my life. And so one of the things that I see as it relates to global influence is you can't lift people beyond your own exposure. You can't enlighten people beyond your own depth. And so I didn't see global ministry just simply about me, but I saw it as it relates to Southwest Georgia.